Come along with us as we explore the broad world of preservation and the work being done to preserve, interpret, and save our past in a 21st century world. From aquaculture to historic foodways to forensic modeling, we're talking weekly with experts from across the globe. This is your host, Nick Redding. Welcome to PreserveCast. Did you know that the Campaign for Historic Trades, which is powered by Preservation Maryland, is the sponsor of 3 registered apprenticeship programs? The campaign also hosts workshops across the nation, maybe even one in your backyard. Visit historictrades.org to learn more and find a way to learn a trade. This is Nick Redding. You are once again listening to PreserveCast, and once again we're having some friends back from the Richard Hampton Jenrette Foundation. We don't always so often have people back right away, but they have such an important report that they've just put together that we definitely wanted to bring this conversation to PreserveCast. It seems so timely for a national and really even an international audience. But before we jump into that, just a reminder to PreserveCast listeners, it really does help if you rate and review the podcast on whatever platform you're listening on. So please do that. Also, remember that we've got a whole backlog of episodes, almost 350 episodes and counting. So you can get that wherever you get your podcasts, or you can go to preservecast.org and also learn information about the organization behind PreserveCast, because PreserveCast is powered by Preservation Maryland. And so if you've been enjoying this and you're thinking about year-end giving and things like that, we have opportunities to donate and give, or even sponsor if you are in a position as a corporation or a foundation or another organization to sponsor. And you'll be hearing more from our sponsors in a little bit. But before we go too far, I'd love to jump back into today's episode and talk with the 2 guests that we have. So we're going to be joined today by Benjamin Prosky, who's the president of the Richard Hampton Jenrette Foundation, as well as Will Hamilton, who is the director of historic preservation for the foundation. And we're going to be talking about this report. Both are return guests to PreserveCast, but just as a refresher for everyone, we like to get to know people a little bit. So maybe we'll start with Will and then we'll head over to Ben. But Will, where are you from? Where'd you grow up? And how'd you get involved in historic preservation?
Well, Nick, thank you for having us. I appreciate the opportunity. I am from a town just south of Charlotte, North Carolina, Rock Hill, South Carolina. It's sort of a long story. I'll try to make it as brief as I can. But I went to Wofford College in Spartanburg, South Carolina, and got a degree in history. And I knew what I didn't want to do professionally. I didn't really know what I wanted to do after college, so I took some time to start poking around online for graduate programs focused on what I enjoyed, those topics being history, construction, anything outside. That's kind of what I was looking for, and happened upon Clemson's program, which was still kind of in its infancy in 2006. Yeah. And ultimately got in, met my first employer, which is a preservation contractor in Charleston called Richard Marks Restorations. Worked in the field for, 8 or 9 years, doing everything he let me, trying to get hands-on experience. And then was approached by Historic Charleston Foundation to be their property manager. So that entailed keeping track of building preservation projects and doing a little bit of advocacy work for that group, and was with them for about 10 years. And then right in the middle of the pandemic, this opportunity arose as director of preservation for, I guess, what was Classical American Homes Preservation Trust, now obviously the Richard Hampton Jenrette Foundation, and jumped on it. I love it. It's sort of an expanded version of what I was doing at Historic Charleston Foundation, minus, the kind of technical advocacy kind of stuff. But yeah, here I am, and get to work with a number of colleagues up and down the East Coast, in addition to lots of institutional partners. I'm still connected with Clemson. But yeah, that's kind of how I got here.
And so in addition to the report that we're going to be talking about today, your sort of day-to-day is are you responsible for the physical campus of all of the different properties owned by the Jenrette Foundation? Is that a fair sort of assessment?
Yeah. We have. I am. We have great what we call site supervisors, so boots on the ground at each of these sites. But yeah, I'm responsible for day-to-day operations and technical projects, budgeting, in addition to landscape work that may need to be done.
Fantastic. And so, Ben, we just had you on not too long ago. So, listeners are probably familiar. We got a lot of great feedback about your episode, learning more about the foundation and sort of the expansive work that you're engaged in. But remind people about where you're from and sort of your path to the foundation.
Great. Well, Nick, thanks so much for having us back and having me back so soon. It's really a pleasure, and we're huge fans of what you do. Just a brief reminder. I always like to tell people I grew up surrounded by historic preservation in Brooklyn Heights, New York City. It was the nation's, not the nation's, but the city's first historic district. So I always knew, I love the old stuff around me. There's great architecture around me. And, just briefly, my career took me to study architectural history and urban planning, and I worked mostly with contemporary architects, working in a range of museums at first, then in academia at schools of architecture, and finally running the New York chapter of the American Institute of Architects and the Center for Architecture. So the Jenrette Foundation really became this opportunity to dig deeper into and focus on the role of historic preservation. We also focus on historic landscapes, American decorative arts, and historic building trades and craft. It felt timely. Our nation, right, has its aging buildings, infrastructure. We've lost a lot of the skills that we need to maintain them, and the foundation's desire and the opportunity to really help delve into how we can, map out a future for historic buildings, historic landscapes, and objects in our country was a great opportunity. So that's what brought me back.
It's fantastic. And it's obviously, we had a good conversation. We can link it in the show notes to kind of connect people with a more expansive look at the work of the foundation, because we really kind of dug into that and got a really kind of behind the scenes look at how it's evolved. And I think part of the evolution, this is almost like part two to that conversation, where we said, okay, here's this foundation that initially is sort of charged with just, I don't want to say just, but really sort of looking at the physical campus of their holdings. And now it's sort of taking this even more expansive look at how do we use your campus, kind of putting words in your mouth, as a way to talk about big issues and engage in the field. And this is one of those ways that you've begun to have that conversation. So maybe we'll ask this question for Ben first, but you have this new report out called The State of American Historic Preservation Education. We're going to put a link in the notes so that people can click on this and download it and kind of dig into it. But why this report? Why now? Where does this fit within the strategy of the Jenrette Foundation? Why does this matter to you? Why did you feel like you had to work on this at this moment?
Great. Nick, as we discussed in the last one, I believe, I think we, the foundation's gone through a great refocusing and a strategic plan, which led us to really double down on our missional areas of interest, right? As I mentioned, historic preservation, American decorative arts, historic landscapes, and historic building trades. And so as we decided to do that and work with other partners, meaning give grants, right? The board in its very wise guidance said, hey, how are we advising our decisions? How are we making sure we know that we're going to be impactful in the areas? And so we came up with this idea to put together groups of advisors that would help us in our areas of interest, but in a way to engage them and to really harness their expertise. We came up with the format of engaging them, speaking with them over a series of months, but then having them come to an in-person, what I kind of call a think tank convening. Not a big conference, but a kind of closed door place where they can exchange ideas. Also a bunch of people invited to participate in the audience to get some other perspectives, but really share. So What we did is this is in a series of reports that we're doing on our areas of interest. We actually launched with the State of American Decorative Arts back in January of this year. And that report looked at collecting institutions and curators and sort of, where is the place for objects and Brown's furnitures in museum exhibitions and so on, and how are people telling those stories? So now we really wanted to turn our focus to historic preservation, right? We're giving a lot of grants, very related to education in historic preservation, right? Internships, fellowships, and we wanted to get some feedback from the people who are shaping some of the top minds. So, some of our questions, we feel that we're at a crossroads in the field. And we were worried seeing internships drying up, seeing in some cases applications to preservation programs starting to wane, that preservation in the academy was losing cultural relevance, right? So in our conversations with heads of programs, we found that, and even actually people outside, historic preservation often feels elitist and outdated as a term, right? Is this the right term for what we're doing? Maybe the field needs a rebrand, and that rebrand might be to emphasize storytelling, community sustainability, social benefits for preservation rather than just nostalgia or deserve to preserve, right? Why? Who does it benefit? And how is it actually a relevant and integral part of a place? And that, right, it can be reframed as a civic and economic tool. So we reached out to this panel of essentially 12 heads of preservation programs to ask them these questions. And what we found, and Will really go into this in a bit, but what our fear was that many graduates are unprepared for real world work. There's kind of been a lack of hands-on and community-based learning in these programs, and maybe that's not all the fault of these schools, right? We're looking to partner with them, but if internships, fellowships, places have dried up, and we heard this a lot since the pandemic, how are students of preservation going to get these hands-on experiences which make their work so relevant? Faculty struggle to gain institutional support. And their practice is a bit different as maybe history faculty or producing papers, or science faculty, or who are doing sort of experiments and major research. We felt that the academies they're in often struggle to understand the relevance, and maybe preservation has to make a better case for itself. And again, just that curriculum must be more integrated to live projects, community collaboration, not so theoretical. You can't become a policymaker in preservation if you've never been on a site where a building's being restored. So some of these are kind of our findings, and we'll get into them, but these were kind of our questions for the academy. Are you able to do this? How do you need support doing this? And are you talking to each other, right? Sometimes people are doing this in isolation, and we wanted to, not only get this information for ourselves and to inform our processes, but help them make connections. There's Nick P., the National Council for Preservation Educators, who does a great job. We as a foundation wanted to kind of bolster and build on that to make a little bit more of a focused group. And so that was our stepping off point, and we were really grateful for the time and the candid responses we got from this group.
So, Will, I mean, that's a perfect way to frame this and kind of launch the conversation. And obviously, there's a lot to dig into there. I guess one question, there's obviously Ben pointed out sort of this division between the academy and the practice of preservation. And we're the host here of PreserveCast, but as I mentioned at the beginning, this podcast is powered by a state historic preservation group by Preservation Maryland, and we see that, right? Like we see that in students coming in, and whether they be interns or whether they be recent graduates. And not because of any, like Ben pointed out, not because of any desire to fail a student, but it just sort of sometimes happens in practice. I guess one question I have is, and I asked this question of myself about preservation in general, is it that has something changed that no longer supports what we need, or was it sort of inherently flawed from the beginning? So like, is this something that over time has shifted, that we're not preparing people for the current challenges, or has the practice of educating for preservation sort of been I don't want to say inherently flawed, because that sounds pretty dramatic, but is there something that just we've been getting wrong for a while? What do you think? Where does this all stand right now?
Sure. Well, as we were all looking at this, we recognize that preservation education must evolve. It's going to evolve from technical training, cultural leadership. Students need to learn cultural and ethical engagement, community listening, climate resiliency and advocacy, not just or alongside materials conservation. There needs to be a interdisciplinary or collaborative fluency in planning, design, heritage, public history, and environment. I saw a lot of that at Historic Charleston Foundation, or lack thereof, I should say. Programs that focus narrowly on compliance risk becoming irrelevant. We saw preservation as an engine for economic impact and workforce development. Rehabilitation and reuse projects create skilled jobs and support and strengthen local economies. And again, going back to that collaborative kind of idea, we feel like preservation needs to be a part of a broader planning, sustainability, and resilience strategy. Building on this, we began to see that universities can strengthen the field by aligning their research and working together, teaching with community and economic outcomes. So again, Ben touched on it. Like, how did we do this? So we assembled an advisory committee from a number of historic preservation programs from across the country, and I'll go through them. We had Clemson, University of Oregon, University of Mary Washington, the Art Institute of Chicago, University of Texas, University of Kentucky, Tulane, Notre Dame, Columbia, Penn, Cornell, Pratt. So all over the country, trying to get an idea as to where these groups and professors stand on historic preservation education. So we developed a survey, and the group prepared presentations on insights and challenges that currently face historic preservation in the United States. So along with that, we had, along with the advisors, we invited 2 graduate students to participate in a gathering in June in person, along with a group of historic preservation professionals and leaders from other nonprofit groups that are focused on historic preservation, for a day of presentations and feedback and discussion focused on the topic.
And so what are some of the primary concerns that jump out at you? And how can we potentially fix it? I have some follow-up questions and some questions on sort of specifics, but I'm curious from your perspective, for people jumping into this report, what are they going to find in terms of these primary areas of concern? What worries people the most? What are some things that just seem to be a common theme among all the people you're talking to?
Sure. No. And again, I mean, I saw this myself, a number of these concerns myself, but we found that underfunding seems to be a constant issue for programs, faculty, and students, particular as that relates to internships and externships. Low visibility, weak recruitment. Like I said, I didn't know this was a thing. I mean, this was obviously almost 20 years ago when I was coming through Clemson's program, but I didn't know, you could have a career in historic preservation. Obviously, high tuition, low-paying jobs, which lead to a reduction in diversity and jobs that really don't often match the level of training that's required. Limited job pipeline. There are not many jobs out there. Few entry level roles that match how students have been trained. Then you've got institutional pressures with small and some large programs struggling with enrollment and financial expectations, and simply a lack of data. As we were going through this process, we found that few programs actively track alumni outcomes or measure their broader impact. So, going back to areas of concern and then related to, how do we fix that? How do we improve that? We're recommending integrated hands-on field work into the education, or I should say into the curricula, and expanded partnerships with universities, preservation programs, and site-based labs, kind of like the Genrat Foundation is using the sites that we steward. That'll help to embed students in real-world preservation projects at historic sites, and turning historic homes into living classrooms, and building the next generation of skilled practitioners and community collaborators. We feel like collections should be elevated with improved access. We were fortunate recently to be able to go to the Brooklyn Museum and see their visible storage, along with oh gosh, Ben, in DC, the
National Building Museum.
National Building Museum is doing that as well. Creating accessible framework for managing their collections, using visible storage, digitization, public databases, and crowdsourced storytelling to help ensure that these become shared resources and not hidden in a back room somewhere. So
it's interesting because in some ways it sort of feels like, and not to, it's sort of like a call to, for lack of better words, like back to basics in some ways. Like, we should have preservation students out at historic sites. I mean, that in and of itself it shouldn't be groundbreaking, but in some ways it kind of is, or it's gotten to that point. I'm curious about this. And this is a touchy subject when you're talking about academic institutions, but I've heard some conversations about, is there an over-credentialing of preservation? Have we made it so difficult to get in? Do you need a graduate degree to go out and do architectural survey, or could we accomplish that with an undergraduate degree? And that gets into the conversation of just sort of higher ed in general. But I have had that. I mean, people actually brought this up on LinkedIn. I just saw recently this kind of conversation about, like, has the field moved in this direction where things are just too expensive, over-credentialed? You have to have a graduate degree to get a job that, like Will pointed out, maybe doesn't pay equal to what a graduate degree would in another field. I'm seeing Ben sort of jump up for this question. Like, what do you think about that? I'm just sort of open-ended. What are your thoughts on that issue?
Yeah, this is a loaded area, right? Because we believe in it so much, right? We don't want to come across as pessimists, but preservation has maybe become a little too precious, and it needs to be a little more practical. We need to engage those who want to do it at many levels, right? And so the skilled people coming out of these programs, and we're not demeaning their education in any way, shape, or form, need to be more as, what we were thinking as kind of cultural agents, like people who are going to help frame these experiences for a range of people. And Nick, you mentioned the historic sites. One of the things we champion at the Genret Foundation, and one of the things our funding goes towards, right? While we don't fund brick and mortar per se, we will help fund a historic site if they are going to engage a student or an intern or a fellow in a process, whether it is wood carving or design process, in a meaningful way, because that makes the work more relevant, and it also creates an interest and a pathway in. So I think you're pointing out some really important things that, and I kind of mentioned this at the beginning. Preservation became perceived as, by many, as a finger wagging no. It's a no. It's not a yes and it's not a practical, it's not an economic development, it's not a community thing, right? And I'm sure the penny preservationists will argue with me that that's what they intend, that's what they do, and I believe it and I know it. But I think when I talk to, I came out of the AIA, right? The professional architects. A lot of those people working on contemporary projects, their only interaction with preservationists are preservationists telling them what they cannot do and why what they're doing is wrong. And maybe sometimes it is, right? But it's not as collaborative as it needs to be. So, right? Let's use the expertise we have. Let's use now our history, because preservation movement in America is starting to get some decades on it, to kind of do this reset. Yeah.
And I think it's interesting, one word that you, or maybe it's two words, but a phrase that you used, this idea of sort of a think tank experience. And we had Erica Avrami on. I don't know if she was part of the conversations, but yeah, and I could probably have her on every week on PreserveCast and learn something new. But she's sort of argued and has pointed out that like preservation needs a think tank. Like we need to have this kind of moment, and it's great to sort of see the Jen Rett Foundation in some ways filling that. I'm curious because maybe it's sort of just sort of another loaded question, but the Jen Rett Foundation is having this conversation about the future of historic preservation education in the United States. Why the Jen Rett Foundation? Why, where is the National Trust for Historic Preservation in this conversation?
Read my mind. I was just going to go there. We were at the National Trust conference just recently in Milwaukee. In fact, we got so excited because, the National Trust is, it represents preservation in America, right?
Right.
And I think under Carol Quillen's new leadership, it's going through its own reset and deep diving, deep thinking, right? I think I have great hopes for the National Trust and its future. And I think it needs this moment of reflection. But we launched this report there, and we actually finished to get it done because I thought, wow, there's like all these people that are going to be there. And I'm going to be frank, and I said this to the trust. Not a single one of the educators who are heads of these programs across America came to that conference. Not one, nor their students. So therein lies, the premise of what we set out here is that
right, there's some disconnect
between those who are the future of the profession and those who are the professionals coming to the conference, or even the trust even can attract amateurs or people who love it. Great. But they need to have a reason to come together to talk about solving these problems. And if the trust conference was not that place, where is? Our offer is to help, right? We now have pulled together a group. And again, there's the National Council on Preservation Education, which also, has an engine behind it. I think in our reset collectively, we need to bring these things together, because there's no point in duplicating or replicating or dismissing some of these structures that exist. It's about harnessing them. And I said, frankly, for National Trust, not making sure there's students and faculty there, your pipeline of the trust is disappearing, because, right, if the people who teach students of preservation don't think that going to the conference is relevant, and there's no organized way for students to be there, how are they going to learn to come? And why the conference? Why is that important, right? Okay, great networking, whatever. In their best case scenarios, these gatherings that the trust does, these are about problem solving. It's about hearing from other people facing similar issues as you are, and sometimes not duplicating the work, but sharing. And so we as a grant maker who fund internships, who fund educational research, we have an interest in seeing that work continue beyond our funding or our role. We want to see these things come together. So I'm an optimist. The structures, the entities, they exist. We need to kind of hunker down together and think, who are we attracting and how are we creating the conversations we need to have now?
Yeah, and
and
that's the reason I
and
asked the
beyond too, right? Not
yeah,
only
and that's where we're gonna get to, is sort of the beyond, where this takes us, and that's really the reason I asked the question. I mean, we had Carol Quillen of the National Trust on a couple, maybe about a month ago or so. Actually, during the conference, we posted that episode, and so we're very interested in the work of the trust, and have had them on and give them a platform to kind of talk about where they're headed, and that's why I asked the question, because I think some people listening will hear this and think, well, where are they in the conversation? And that's part and parcel of the conversation, right? Like,
right.
how do we keep all of this connected? And also, to your point about like repositioning and or rebranding, is the fact that it's the preservation conference, is that something that isn't appealing to students? And if so, why? And is it the conference model that doesn't work? There's a lot of things kind of built into that conversation, as well as just sort of this idea back to think tanks, that like movements, industries, collections of people, ideas have to have multiple different places to have those conversations. It's okay to have multiple think tanks. Nobody would look askance at that when it comes to other issues. So I think it's valuable for us to have different areas to have these conversations. And for us, in one small, silly little way, PreserveCast is a place to kind of like at least platform these different things and show people that they're having these conversations. But as you pointed out, Ben, like, where does this take us? I mean, maybe over to Will for a second. I mean, what do you do with this information now? What's the anticipation that you will take this information and do what with it?
Well, Ben, I'll let you take this. I do want to just say one quick thing. So this is not a one and done situation. This is a document that we'll come back to. Like I said, things evolve in historic preservation education. So maybe not every year, maybe not every 2 or 3 years, but every 4 or 5 years, I see us coming back to this and reconvening to help kind of highlight the state of things as it relates to historic preservation education.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question, right? And we were asked that by our friends at the Trust too, right? Validly, right? Okay, so you did this report, and right, and we wanted to share it. We didn't just do it for ourselves. Look, we want to help position preservation as relevant, and be part of the economic growth or health of this country. I look again back to the trust. I look at programs like the Main Street program, right? And how many students would love to get involved in that and learn about that in the process. So we will work with a range of groups to think about that. As far as us, right? It's informing what we're doing. So we're gearing up for our biggest year of grant making to date. Hate to say this to everybody. I mean, we've already spent the money and we've planned and spent it, but it's going to be, we've earmarked it, but we're going to be doing $1.5 million into education, largely and grant making, largely very related to preservation with 50 to 60 partners. This report will help us measure that, right? And some of the goals and ideas in it, we're going to look at, okay, is what we're funding actually helping to advance these findings? I think what people could look out for is that we're also doing the 2 more reports that I mentioned this coming year, next year. State of historic and cultural landscapes, kind of thinking about that. And then state of historic building trades and crafts. These things are not silos, right? They all work together. And then, I would say that we ourselves are planning amongst that expanded grant making to work with a range of these programs on some GenRet funded scholarships, right? Because first and foremost, we heard that students being able to pay for these programs, even understanding that they exist. So, when you're offering a scholarship to come, you do more recruitment. And so we want to, and we're actively talking with our board about this, who's very excited, and look forward to a forthcoming announcement, I would say, in 2026. But our plan is also to kind of put our money where our mouth is about this and say, okay, we've heard from these schools that they actually need some direct aid, right? And after we've gotten their expertise, we are going to help in funding some of the opportunities to get students to schools, and we'll make it competitive, which is great, right? Because it'll be more sought after. We'll create reasons to come. So yeah, I think those are some of my thoughts of where we go from here. But Nick, I mean, I don't know if go back. I mean, we've talked a lot about talking to the people in our groups who already um, who already know or complain to each other about the issues. Um, I think some of the biggest work for the schools, for us, for our peers, our hope with this report is that it's not going to be read as only what the Gen Ed Foundation could or should do, but maybe other funders and other places can glean something from it. We need to be talking to people outside of the preservation field. We need to be talking to developers. We need to be talking to people who make policy in government and so on. And whether it's equipping the educators, whether it's equipping the students, but it's making this case that the future of preservation in America is a positive economic thing. It's good for our cities and our towns and our villages. And it is a workforce development opportunity, right? If schools in universities, let's say research universities that house some of these programs, they are always asking, what are you really contributing, right? When you're a preservation program at a university that has major science and stem cell research and other things, presidents of that university are saying, how are you contributing? How are you contributing research or skills or a workforce that is integral and needed? And I think that we have to think in this big tent idea of, okay, we're not going to finger wag. We're not going to say deserve to preserve. So it's up onto you, the owner, the developer, to figure it out. We're going to say, hey, whether you like the thing or not, its place, its presence, its history is valid. And actually putting it back together, restoring it, saving it can be such a big economic driver, for the people who could work on it, from maybe more lay people to skilled preservationists, to just the sense of place in your own community it's going to create to save something. Again, I'm not saying that people haven't been doing this. They do it. They're great people who are doing this already. I just think we need to make this kind of our headline to the broader world.
Yeah, and I think in some ways, you're right. There are people who have had different moments, and the trust has been involved in them. I think of Bonnie McDonald at Landmarks Illinois in the Relevancy Project, where she talked about sort of how can preservation be relevant again. And we have these different moments, and I think it's important. I think in some ways it feels like we're sometimes maybe retrotting ground, but I think also it's important to be reminded of it routinely and regularly, because it's easy to lose focus or kind of get yourself mired in the day-to-day. And it's important for us to kind of remind different aspects of the community. And what it requires is just constant talking, right? Like we just have to constantly be talking to other people. And you point out conferences. I know there are some preservationists who sort of look at going to conferences of other movements as important, because we bring the conversation to other places. So I know, like, we've sent staff to YIMBY conferences and talked about how preservation can be part of that conversation, or we send people to Main Street conferences or environmental conferences. We spend a lot of times with developers. So you just have to constantly be talking, and that's all we do on PreserveCast. So it comes naturally to us. We've had both of you on before, and we've asked about your favorite buildings. So we won't do that, but let's talk about sort of not only these great reports that you guys are putting together in collaboration with a lot of partners and really trying to foster this thinking. But we also have this seminal moment in the 250th anniversary of the country coming up next year. And if there was ever a time to sort of capture the nation's imagination about the value or the power of the past, this could be one of those moments. You look back to 1976, and that was a seminal moment for historic preservation. It's when the Historic Preservation Fund gets its money. It's when we have tens of thousands of historic house museums opened up for, and now sort of dealing with the legacy of that as well. It's when a lot of these preservation schools begin really thinking in earnest about sort of creating their programs. And we'll start with Will, and then we'll end with Ben. But Will, what is your hope for sort of the preservation community when it comes to the 250th? What do you think would be a win for us coming out of 2026? What's it look like from your vantage point?
Well, I look back on this conversation and then my education and professional career, and the Jeanneret Foundation is really kind of focused on the end of the educational pipeline. But I think about younger audiences, and I think about myself when I was, coming up in grade school, and now everybody's got cell phones and screens in front of them. And, how do we make this more attractive for younger people? And going back to the Jeanneret Foundation's, or one of the tenets in our mission, I think, we need to continue to focus on innovation, and innovative approaches to historic preservation, using this, digital platforms and immersive technologies to kind of tell a more dynamic story from multiple viewpoints. I think that should be at least will be one of my primary focuses as we move into the 250th next year.
I like that. Ben, where is your mind on the 250th?
So it's just a number. It's just a year, and it's important. I'm all about the future, though. So we're actually at a time where there's a lot of conflict in our nation in terms of thinking about the past and how we should do it, right? So my hope is that we're telling the whole history. We're not making people feel badly that things happened in the past. We're teaching them why it's not right. Certain things happened, but we're inviting them to think reflectively and critically, right? So how is that done? It's done, as Will mentioned, right? Get off your, sure, there's going to be some good online stuff, and yes, listen to PreserveCast on your, but maybe you do it in the context of an actual site. Get out and see things. People have got to get out and see things, or bring their kids to see things. And it doesn't even always have to be a didactic whole hour long, give them a few points, give them a few points of interest of why on the 250th this is relevant to a local community, our nation, our country coming together. And then I'd say for preservation, okay, so 250 seems like a long time to us, but we need to think a little globally. It's actually not that long. Look at Europe. Look at the Middle East. Look at China. This is a blip in history. And they, in many of these places, I mean, especially in Europe, look at how they've taken care of and live amongst buildings and even learn in buildings that are 500 years old, and 450 years old, 300 years old. Let's think about what these places that we're visiting now are going to look like in 100, 200, 250 years in America, and how we're going to care for them, what our hopes for them are, right? Is interpreting them the way we do now the right way? Maybe it is for now, but how do we make sure we don't lock ourselves in? And how do we learn to live with our history for the long shot? And I do think sometimes we have to be reminded to look elsewhere and learn from people who've been doing it for longer than we have. So yeah, I know it's about our American Revolution in that moment, but I think let's think broadly, let's think about the future, and let's think about what we want our descendants to learn about these places and our legacy in 250 years.
I love that. I think it's a great place to end the conversation. Great way to kind of wrap a conversation about an important report. And love that Ben's already thinking about the 500th anniversary of the country. And the report, again, that we've been talking about has been put together by the Richard Hampton Jenrette Foundation, and it is entitled The State of American Historic Preservation Education. You can grab it in the links below. You can learn more about the foundation below. I surmise this will not be the last time that we'll have Ben on, because if he's got more reports, we're going to have more time to talk about them here on PreserveCast. Thanks so much for joining us, both Ben Prosky and Will Hamilton.
Thank you.
Thank you.
PreserveCast is recorded in Maryland and is powered by Preservation Maryland, a nonprofit organization headquartered in Baltimore, Maryland. Since 2017, the podcast has told stories from around the world about how people are documenting, caring for, and interpreting the past. If you want to support this effort, please visit preservecast.org to learn more and keep on preserving.